1976 to finish my doctorate, and I've been here ever since.
Yankees fan or a Mets fan?
I have to honor my dear departed father, a Yankees fan.
There you go. Okay. And did you do graduate work just at the University of Utah or any other universities?
I did graduate work at Montclair State in New Jersey and at the University of Utah.
Any fellowships or special training opportunities?
I'm not sure I can answer the question. I finished my degree and did a doctoral residency to sit for my license, which I did. The license is generic in the state of Utah. So your license is a psychologist and then ethically responsible to practice within the area in which you've been trained.
And you have specialty areas or interest areas in both children and adults, is that correct?
In my clinical work? Yes.
Okay.
Primarily children in my clinical work.
Okay. And tell the jury about your publications, would you?
What would you like me to tell them?
Summarize in less than 3 minutes.
My 54th book just came out. A large number of clinical textbooks that are used by other professionals, trade books for the general public. I edit a major science journal, comes out 14 times a year on attention and related problems. It's 2,000 pages of peer-reviewed research. I've authored or co-authored a dozen psychological tests and neuropsychological tests that are used all over the world.
Tell us about some of those tests, what they show, or intended to show.
Well, the one I'm most proud of, the cognitive assessment system, is a measure of someone's critical thinking and problem solving that's independent of the effects of culture or experience. So Aboriginal children in the outback, affluent children in suburbia at the same ages test the same way. So we created that instrument to avoid the bias of children coming from underprivileged homes or minorities being unfairly identified as having disabilities in the schools.
Okay. Now, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but I'd like you to tell the jury briefly what executive function
What I think it is?
What it is scientifically in the field of neuropsychology.
Well, there's a lot of disagreement in what it is. It's become a very popular term in education now, but primarily it refers to how you do what you do. It's the strategies or behaviors you employ in solving whatever problems you have in the course of your day. Some people believe it's a variety of different kinds of abilities: memory, emotional regulation, planning. And in our research, it seems to be an overarching, a singular phenomenon: how you do what you do. Anything you do to improve outcome would be an executive function. Your preparation for this trial, for my examination, would be considered an executive function, improving what you hope to achieve in my testimony. And in everyday life, it's how we do what we do.
Have you published in this area?
My co-edited textbook on executive functioning is the most widely used in the world, I'm told. And my assessment tool, the Comprehensive Executive Functioning Inventory, is standardized on the general population of children and adults, and we use it as an observational measure. So a parent would fill it out, or a teacher, or an individual, asking questions about how they do what they do. How do you plan? How do you regulate your emotions? It's different from the kind of neuropsychological testing most people think of when you think of someone sitting across a computer or face-to-face with an evaluator being asked questions or putting puzzles together, etc. This is more about how you do. It's more about behavior.
Okay. Can a person hypothetically score really high, a bright person, a person of some substance, education, score really high on neuropsychological testing of things like words and concepts and do really poorly on executive function?
So you mean someone like Einstein?
Einstein?
Yes.
Or Terry Sanderson?
Or Terry Sanderson, correct. Our neuropsychological tests measure your ability to think critically, your memory, how you go about solving problems in a controlled environment. but the relationship of those tests to real-world behavior is fairly limited. So you can be very bright, particularly if you have a brain injury to the front of your brain.
So the frontal lobe?
Yeah, orbitofrontal, the lower frontal part. You can be still very, very bright, intellectually advanced, and still have a lot of trouble in everyday life. Perseverating, going over things again and again, finding it difficult to problem solve, repeating yourself, trouble controlling your emotions. Again, you use the term executive functioning. Any behavior that you engage in to demonstrate what you know in an effective way. Knowing it isn't enough. You have to know how to execute it. You have to know how to do it.
Okay. Do people sometimes short circuit that in common everyday parlance and saying, being able to keep 2 balls in the air, 3 balls in the air at one time?
I don't understand the question. What was the question?
Well, let's suppose that you're a juror. Some of the case. You need to come up here in the snow, in the ice, okay? Yet you have things to worry about at home, too. So you kind of juggle all these things. Executive function help you do that?
The ability to think about one thing and put something else out of your mind?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, any behavior you engage in, whether it's internal in your thinking or external in how you do what you do, if it improves your performance and your functioning, it falls under that umbrella.
Over your career, okay, roughly what, 1976 to the present?
So the clinic I opened with a neurologist, we opened in 1980.
Okay.
We see about 500 or 600 children and a few hundred adults every year, right through COVID. About half the people I see have brain injuries. The other half have more complicated genetic or related kinds of developmental problems. You don't want to see me. You don't want your children or any of your relatives to have to see me.
Yeah.
They're not all in litigation. I do about one litigation forensic case a week. I don't know if that's been explained to the jury, but in a forensic matter, I'm not treating. I'm simply retained, and I am a retained expert. So I like to think that I'm unbiased and I'm not an advocate, but I am retained by one side or another to offer opinions and answer questions.
How often are you retained roughly by the plaintiff side and the defense side? We're plaintiff here.
I'm asked that all the time, and my response is it doesn't matter because I'm not an advocate. My opinions will be the same, I would hope. I make that effort regardless of who I'm testifying for. I would argue, given that the rules now require me to keep 7 years worth of records, it's about even between plaintiff and defense. Correct.
Okay. Now, over the course of your career since about 1980, talking about 43 years, give or take, how many neuropsychological evaluations have been performed in your clinic?
In my clinic, by me or by myself and my doctoral residents?
Everyone.
It's roughly, as I've testified, 700 or 800 a year. Again, they're not all in litigation. It's grown. The first 10 years it was smaller. It's grown over the years, but last year it was about 700 evaluations.
We're talking about roughly, I'm just a country lawyer, okay? I'm not very smart, but I can do a little bit of math. That's talking about 16,000 neuropsychological evaluations. 700 a year times 10 is 7,000. Times 20 is 14,000?
It's a lot, yes.
Okay. And how many of those have you done personally?
I do about 200 a year, about 4 a week when I'm in the clinic. Again, they're not all in litigation, and 2/3 are children. In my clinic, in my forensic work, it's about the other way around. I think in my deposition I said it was 50-50. I think it's probably closer to 70-30 because we spend the majority of our lives as adults.
Sure.
So it wouldn't be unexpected in litigation. A significant percentage of people with brain injuries, or I might be involved, will be an adult versus a child.
Now, in all of those evaluations, all those events, 16,000 in the clinics and several thousand, multiple thousands for you personally, have you ever issued a report or done an evaluation without seeing the individual and interviewing the individual who's the center of the case, ever.
Not in an evaluation. I've been asked to do record reviews. That's a very different matter.
So, how important is it, if you're going to get a legitimate opinion, to do a clinical meeting with the individual?
Well, and again, I don't mean to be difficult, but it matters what opinion. If I conduct a record review, the opinions I offer are the accuracy of the foundation treaters or other experts have provided in forming their opinions. So my review asks the question, does this person provide sufficient foundation, that's a term you attorneys use, sufficient facts to support the opinions they've offered? But as someone doing a record review, I can't offer my own opinion.
So, when you do a record review, you're looking at evaluating the testing done by others, right?
And the medical records and the care provided, but I can't offer my own opinion. I can disagree with the opinions of others based on what I perceive as their lack of foundation.
But you can't offer your own opinion as to the neuropsychological status of somebody without doing a clinical interview. Is that correct?
I could, but it would be both unethical and unscientific. How can I offer an opinion based on the data someone else gathered without gathering my own data? Maybe I would ask questions a little differently. Maybe I would observe the patient somewhat differently. So I can offer opinions about the opinions of others, but I can't offer my own opinions unless I actually see the person.
Okay. So, would it be true that seeing the person is important if you're going to offer an opinion in court?
About the person?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. How important? How important?
Oh, well, in my work it would be at least 99% important. Maybe in the legal arena it might be 51% important.
Why did you say, a minute ago you said unethical. What did you mean by that?
Well, if you're a member of the American Psychological Association, one of the standards of ethics is you don't provide independent opinions about a person unless you've seen them or there are other circumstances that might preclude you from seeing them.
Like they're dead or something, right?
Could be they're dead, could be in a forensic setting, opposing counsel refuses to make their client available.
Okay. Now, you've done a lot of medical legal work, you mentioned that. Are you familiar with the Rule 35 exam, sometimes called an IME, independent medical exam, that allows you to request to see somebody?
Your Honor, may we approach? Sure.
percentage of your clinical practice is children versus adults? I may have covered that, but I wanted to be sure I had.
Yeah, I mentioned that. It's in my clinical practice, it's at least 2/3 children.
All right. And how often do you see victims of concussion, adults, victims of concussion?
In the clinical practice or forensic
Both.
practice or both?
Yeah.
At least someone every week. That's big part of what I do.
Okay. How is, do neuropsychologists sometimes, if they're trained, determine causation of a concussion?
Some will, yes.
And how do you do that?
Review medical records, have an understanding and appreciation of the diagnostic process, understand the symptoms of concussion, as well as understanding the liabilities of determining the causality of those symptoms and coming to a conclusion. In a forensic matter, I defer to the diagnosis of a concussion to a physician, preferably within proximity to an event. It's just easier for the jury, I think, to understand what each expert's role is.
Okay. Now, could you tell the jury briefly what information you reviewed and relied on in this case?
I don't know if I can do that briefly, but your office
Do your best.
your office provided me with a long set of records and depositions from multiple providers, both before and after this particular accident, and that's what I used. I don't look at every single record as foundation for my opinion. A few minutes ago, I explained about the importance of the foundation in terms of the facts you offer to support your opinion. There are a lot of records I receive that don't have anything to do with the questions you're asking me to address. If in any way I think a record might reflect that, I will put it into my report and as foundation.
All right. Did you review medical records from the clinic in Park City?
I looked at them, yes.
Did you review the records from the medical building at the Deer Valley Ski Resort?
Yes.
Okay. Did you review the VA records?
The ones that were provided to me, yes.
Did you review Dr. Fong's records?
Yes.
Was there anything important in the Deer Valley incident report dated 2/26/16 for your opinions?
Important in my conclusion that this man was suffering the consequences of a brain injury?
Yes. Concussion, brain injury.
Yeah, he was disoriented a bit. His head cleared pretty quickly. It seemed like, again, these are fairly cursory examinations, but there are indications in the records, and then subsequently a care provider indicates that it's their opinion that his symptoms are reflective of a concussion. And I don't question care providers. I wasn't there.
And why are those things important for you?
Well, they're more important for you than for me. In a clinical setting, I'm asked to evaluate someone and offer opinions about their problems and what might help them. In a forensic setting, I'm also asked, do I have an opinion about who's responsible or what event might be responsible? And in a chronology, from looking at all of the records and evaluating Mr. Sanderson, the one event that would appear to acutely lead to the symptoms he was presenting was this particular accident.
Ski collision.
The ski collision, correct.
Now, the day of the collision, Michael McMahon, M-C-M-A-H-A-N, a physician's assistant, evaluated Terry Sanderson, and he wrote, quote, "Patient collided with another skier," end of quote. This is an admitted record. Is that significant for you?
Again, at an event that might cause an injury to his head, any factual information that would help that would be significant. But again, I'm not determining, again, whether Mr. McMahon made an accurate assessment or not. I'm simply taking the record as it appears, and there are multiple indications in the records of symptoms that are consistent with a head injury.
Another thing he says, and I quote, states he lost consciousness, end of quote. Is that significant, and if so, why?
Again, it's a symptom that would be consistent with a head injury. How the patient, in this case Mr. Sanderson, was aware of that isn't in that record, so I don't know how he decided he was or was not unconscious. Sometimes people are disoriented and they consider that being unconscious. Sometimes people are in shock and they're not really unconscious. Other times they are truly unconscious for short periods or for lengthy periods of time.
He also wrote, quote, complaints of mild headache, end of quote. Is that significant for your opinions in any way?
Again, with the caveat that headaches could be caused by all kinds of phenomena, including a brain injury.
Quote, patient was unconscious for an undetermined length of time, close quote. Is that significant?
Yes.
For the same reasons you already expressed.
Yes.
Also, quote, has a sense of dullness, and dullness is in interior quotes, in the front of his head, close quote. Is that significant, and why?
Again, for the same reasons, the term dullness, fog, are interesting descriptions that people will offer when they're experiencing difficulty functioning in everyday life. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what they mean by my head feels dull.
And it says that he states he was, quote, disoriented for a period of time after the injury. Disoriented for a period of time after the injury. Is that significant?
Yes, again, all significant that all of these could be markers of a head injury, or a closed head injury in this case.
Now, are you aware that the very next day, Mr. Sanderson's girlfriend, fiance, took him to the VA, 27th of February. Did you read those records of
Yes.
the complaints made? From memory, can you recall some of those things that were complained of? I can show them to you, but do you recall?
Well, again, he'd been a patient there on an ongoing basis.
For many years.
He had some pre-existing issues that might have made him what you refer to in your field as an asymptomatic eggshell plaintiff, meaning he had some problems that were not causing him difficulty in life, that then proceeded to cause him difficulty in life. But the description was the same types of concussive symptoms: headache, irritability, maybe a loss of consciousness, confusion, problems with concentration. Again, they could have multiple etiologies. People with chronic pain will report those symptoms. People who've been psychologically traumatized will report those symptoms. So they are indicators that something is wrong in an acute way. Over time, the conclusion has been that they are related to a brain injury.
They also did an MRI, I believe, maybe it was a CT, but they wrote in the interpretation, ventricular system discordant with mild volume loss. Do you understand those words? Discordant with mild volume loss?
Well, I'm going to have to preface this with I'm not a neurologist or a
Sure.
neuroradiologist, or I'm a neuropsychologist. He has enlarged ventricles, but he's asymptomatic for high pressure hydrocephalus. It's unclear.
And no volume loss after 7 years, right?
And no change, correct. No acute change in the brain.
He was discharged that day with a warning for, quote, mild traumatic brain injury. And then it said, parentheses, concussion, minor head injury, trauma, closed head injury. Of what significance is that?
Again, it's an indication that the treater was under the impression that these symptoms were related to a concussion or might be related to a concussion, and was cautioning him. Initially, when someone hits their head and there isn't a break in the skull or a bleed, it's referred to as a closed head injury, and typically within a few days it's referred to as a concussion, sometimes sooner. If it persists, then sometimes it's referred to as a persistent or post-concussive disorder, and if it lasts forever, which it seems to do in a small percentage of people for reasons we don't understand, we call it a persistent post-concussive disorder.
Okay. The paperwork he was given, he was told to watch for signs, quote, as long as 1 year after the injury, close quote. Why would someone be given that kind of a warning?
Again, I don't know. I didn't author that document. And I think we have to make a distinction between symptoms and consequences. So with brain injury, one of the rules of thumb is that symptoms are most present at the time of the injury, and over time those symptoms will typically remit. Consequence is different. The consequence is whatever the impact of those symptoms might be, and over time for some people, consequences cause increasing dysfunction and increasing impairment in their lives as those symptoms disrupt their relationships, their ability to work, the quality of their emotional regulation. So again, I think what they were cautioning him is he may still see some consequences over time. We wouldn't expect, again, the majority of people with mild brain injury within a year to a year and a half are better.
Okay. Did you do neuropsychological testing, paper and pencil testing, and interviews? Well, let's just take the paper and pencil testing. Did you do neuropsychological testing on Terry Sanderson?
We did a full battery of neuropsychological tests looking at his abilities. So abilities are defined as those innate differences among us. Some people have better memory, better speed of processing, better attention or organization. I looked at his knowledge, what does he know? And finally, I looked at his skill, and skill is a verb, skillfully doing things, which he was having trouble with. It's not a noun, it's not reading skill. So that's how I frame the assessment, and the tests aren't used to prove or disprove brain injury. They're not capable of doing that. They're designed to look at how he functions relative to people in the general population, or how he might function relative to people with his academic and vocational background. And in particular, in this man's case, because I was seeing him quite some time after the injury, I already had an indication, he'd been tested a number of times before, that his problems were more behavioral, emotional regulation, frontotemporal kinds of problems. I didn't expect them to show up on the neuropsychological testing.
Yeah, I'm looking at your test evaluation here. It's dozens of pages. Dated May, well, I think you said date evaluation May 7 and 8, 2020.
Correct.
So about 3 years ago. Close to.
Correct.
Yeah.
And quite a bit of time after his accident.
Yeah. His accident was February of 16, so about 4 years later.
Correct.
Now, generally, Dr. Goldstein, in your experience, when do you know that a person's condition is permanent in terms of time? What's the rule of thumb?
What's the condition?
Yeah, in other words, if a person isn't better in 4 years, what does it tell you about his condition?
Again, I don't mean to be difficult. Are we talking about brain injury?
Yeah, brain injury, I'm sorry.
Oh, if we're talking about brain injury, by 2 years out, you can compensate, you can learn strategies to function better, but in terms of recovery of the brain, it probably won't happen.
Okay. And do you know roughly how many tests you gave him?
Depends what you define as a test. He was asked,
Neuropsychological test. What
well,
did you
he
give
was asked to complete a number of self-report measures.
Okay.
Some people call those tests, I don't.
Okay.
He was asked to complete a number of face-to-face measures. Those are tests. Probably about a dozen to 15. There was one he became quite stressed that looks at his ability to process information, and we didn't do it because he became distressed about it. I think we did one measure to look at his what's referred to as effort,
Okay.
whether he's making effort, is he malingering or dissimulating. I didn't have any indication he was doing that. And the battery of tests is designed to look at his abilities, his knowledge, and then for someone in his circumstances, how skillfully he can use those two to solve whatever problems I put in front of him.
Now, you mentioned malingering. Do competent neuropsychologists, when they do a test battery on someone like this, particularly someone who's involved in litigation, okay, I don't think, I don't know what stage this was in at 4 years, but are there tests built into tests to test validation? Validation, is it a valid response?
There are two kinds of, we call validity measures, meaning is the person making decent effort?
Right.
One kind are standalone, they're specifically designed for that. I administered one of those measures to him. He passed 100%.
Okay.
There are others that are embedded within a test, meaning the test was designed for one thing, but I'm going to use it to look at something else. I'm not a big fan of those. And the way you use those, if the person performs more poorly than 99% of people, you raise some questions about whether they're making adequate effort or trying to make a mountain out of a molehill of their problems. But in Mr. Sanderson's case, in none of the previous assessments, 2 psychologists, a speech pathologist, and my assessment, no one's ever raised the question that he's not making effort. The question that's been raised is why he's so repetitive, why he's so obsessive. There's never been a question raised that he's not intellectually brighter than most people, that he doesn't have advanced academic knowledge. None of those issues have ever come up.
Bottom line, did you see any evidence of malingering, not making sufficient effort, okay, factitious disorder,
Seeking secondary gain because
secondary
we're in litigation.
gain, any of that?
No,
Nothing.
no.
Terry. Did you review the reports of Doctors Fong, Gibby, and Bain?
Yes,
Okay. Did you review the reports at some point of Doctors Eastwold and Ashkenazi, psychologists, hired by the defense?
I read them, yes. I wouldn't consider them reports. They are record reviews.
Record reviews, right. Did you review the record reviews of Dr. Black, Dr. Esney, and Dr. Hosch?
Yes, they're physicians, so I don't take exception with their opinions.
Now, I'd like to ask you a question. Based on what you've just told the jury, do you have enough information about this case to answer these 3 questions? I won't ask you for the answer yet. Well, strike that. Can you tell me, based on your review, the things you've just told us about, what are the 3 most important things about this case that stuck out to you?
Sure, and I think I suggested to you that because human beings are complicated and lots of information comes at jurors, that when I testify, I like the jury to remember 3 things.
Okay, now you're giving my secret. I want the jury to think I'm smart, not that I'm dumb. Okay?
And
so tell me what those 3 things are that you think are important for them to understand.
sure, and the first one involves common sense.
Okay?
Not to leave your common sense at the door because experts are offering all of these opinions.
Yeah.
Mr. Sanderson may have had pre-existing issues with his health, with his mood, with his brain, but there was, based on the records, an acute adverse change in his behavioral and emotional functioning. And initially it appeared to be a consequence of his physical injuries. He was in pain and quite a lot of pain, but over time it became apparent that it was more than just him being disrupted by pain. And that were it not for that particular accident, the life he was living in the 6 months to a year before, that I think the jury has heard about, would be the life he would continue to be living. So there was an acute change, not something slow and insidious over time, characteristic of Alzheimer's or white matter disease or any other progressive illness in the brain. That's one.
What does acute mean?
Happens very quickly.
Okay? What's number 2?
Number 2 is that these pre-existing vulnerabilities he had don't explain the acute change and now the long-term change in his behavior and functioning. That this is an acute, rapid downturn, and maybe he was, and I use the term, an eggshell plaintiff who was asymptomatic, and maybe those vulnerabilities, as a consequence of his injuries, made it harder for him to recover, made him more symptomatic than other people. don't necessarily can tell you that for sure, but I can tell you that the problems he had before, his mood, his anxiety, his personality style, are not the reasons he's struggling today.
So they don't explain what he's got today, those prior things.
They don't explain the acute change in his functioning and the adverse pattern of emotions and behavior and communication he presents with in everyday life.
Okay, what's number 3?
He's not malingering. He's not, malingering means you're just faking and you know it. He's not dissimulating. Dissimulating means you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You have a little problem, and in an effort to recover or obtain some secondary gain, you make it seem like it's a bigger problem. And nowhere do I see his problem as lack of effort. He has diligently gone to the treatment providers that have been recommended to him. I know his treating neuropsychologist very well. She's an exceptional therapist, and he makes very little progress with her because of his problems.
Okay. Short tutorial, please. And you've already covered some of this, but tell the jury from a standpoint of a neuropsychologist, what is a closed head brain injury? What is an MTBI? You've heard that. With a small m and then a capital TBI.
So it's an injury to the brain that hasn't cracked the skull and doesn't tear the dura, that the head is still intact, but the brain has been injured. And I can offer a little foundation if you'd like to explain how that happens.
Please.
So the brain is connected to the spinal cord, and it just kind of floats around, and the skull evolved to protect the brain from blows like this over millions of years, not just in our species, but in earlier species. So the skull absorbs a lot of force when you're hit over the head. And that was primarily the kind of brain injuries people had until we started moving fast in vehicles. And now most of injuries that people have are acceleration, deceleration, or turning and twisting, and not so much something hitting the brain from the outside. The front of the brain rests on the cribriform plate, which is a bony part of the brain that lets the brain fit very nicely. And if the brain is moving 40 miles an hour and suddenly stops, the brain inside your head goes like this, twists around, and it rubs up against the skull, and you get particularly frontal injuries that lead to disruption in behavior, in mood regulation, in emotional regulation, in socialization. It's pretty classic and fairly common in those kinds of acceleration injuries.
Is that called a frontal lobe damage?
It's called a frontal lobe
Okay.
injury, that's correct. And the brain is probably 120 billion moving parts. It's not like a computer. Each part may be connected to up to 50,000 other parts. At any given moment, one brain cell might be communicating with 5,000 other brain cells simultaneously. We don't understand really how the brain works, and we absolutely don't understand how the mind works. The mind is this abstract creation of the physical brain, and as I've testified in my deposition, I think Terry's problems today are equally reflective of his mind and his thinking and his obsessions as they are of damage to his brain.
Now, let's suppose, I'll hold my hand out here, kind of cupped, see that? That's the skull, and inside my fist is the brain, okay? My knuckles are the front. If someone gets knocked down on a ski run and falls down and hits the snow hard, okay, is the brain going to slosh forward sometimes and strike the inside of that skull?
I'm going to first have to state that I'm not an accident reconstruction expert.
Okay.
I can tell you that any acceleration, deceleration of the head will lead the brain like a rubber ball inside a jar of liquid to bounce around. But I can't testify that the forces that were incurred in this accident were sufficient to damage the brain. That's beyond my expertise.
Okay. But you've seen people that have had injuries like that, is that correct?
Correct.
That has a sudden deceleration.
It's the most common kind of injury, and unfortunately, up until maybe 100 or 150 years ago, if you had a brain injury, you died.
Okay.
So the brain really has no way of repairing itself as far as we're aware, and the brain has no temp agency, meaning if one part of the brain is damaged as an adult, another part of the brain doesn't step up and rewire, and that's very nice pop psychology, but it really doesn't apply, especially in adults. Now in children it may to some extent, but not in adults.
Now, we've heard the term post-concussion syndrome. Is that also one of the words or expressions that's used to express mild traumatic brain injury?
Yes, a mild traumatic brain injury is the equivalent of concussion. If your brain injury is more severe, meaning you have a bleed, you're unconscious for longer periods of time, we typically don't refer to that as a concussion. We refer to that as a moderate to severe brain injury.
In your experience, are people required to have loss of consciousness to have a mild brain injury or a post-concussion syndrome?
No. That's not just my experience.
Yeah.
It's the standard in the field.
Okay, so you've studied this, and that's something you know personally.
I know it from my clinical practice. I know it from my training. I know it from my qualifications, which are, I think, the 3 requirements for me to sit here on the stand.
I'd like to ask you about your opinions in this case. You've already given some. You don't want to be repetitive here. But on February 26, 2016, did Terry Sanderson have a concussion? In your opinion?
You're asking for my opinion or
Yeah.
my review of the records?
View of the records and your opinion.
The review of the records demonstrate he had a concussion.
Okay. Did this result in a traumatic brain injury?
His behavior over time and his treatment by others and his continued treatment today argues that it has.
And I think you've already talked about the cause. Do you believe, what was the cause in your opinion? I'm not asking you who hit whom, but the cause.
The cause of his concussion?
Yes.
The forces his brain was exposed to during that event.
Now, you have noted in your deposition, you were asked a lot about his high test scores. We talked about that a little bit. Many areas, Terry scores exceptionally high, okay, on measures of intellectual experience and achievement. Is that inconsistent with having a brain injury of the kind you've described?
No.
Explain that.
Well, let's look at the foundation of what you've just asked. If an IQ test or a memory test or a measure of list learning told you everything you needed to know about everything the brain does, that would be fine. But we find that neuropsychological tests tell us something about everyday life, but they fall far short of telling us the majority. And in his case, individuals with this kind of frontal injury, and again, he may have been an eggshell person waiting to have a problem, but individuals with his kind of an injury typically have intact neuropsychological testing. You can't look at his IQ scores and argue his IQ is normal, therefore he hasn't had an injury. And the other side of it is maybe his IQ was even higher and now it's just high. Maybe he's lost IQ. I'm not testifying to that because I don't think he's lost intelligence, or I don't think any of the neuropsych testing really demonstrates the problems he has from this accident. The problems he has from this accident are orbitofrontal, emotional regulation, behavior, socialization, impulsive responding, the kinds of stuff that you better understand if you follow someone around for 2 weeks. But I'm rarely afforded that opportunity.
How does, let's suppose that an individual like Terry or others have pre-existing problems. Let's say they get angry a little bit too easily, okay? So they have pre-existing issues psychologically, irritability, let's say. You know, how does a traumatic brain injury, that, as you have described, affect those pre-existing problems in your experience?
It accelerates them.
Why?
It irritates them. That's a good question, but we see it in dementia, in Alzheimer's patients as well. As they age and as their brain begins to have more problems, their good qualities seem to fade away, and whatever adverse qualities they had in life seem to be amplified. We don't really understand why that is. Could be something to do with the mind as opposed to the physical brain. But it's true. If someone had a history of depression and they have a brain injury, odds are whatever depression they experience after, either from the brain injury or from experience, will be worse, and it will be harder for them to recover. If they had pre-existing ADHD, if they were impulsive and inattentive before, it would be harder for them to recover. Any vulnerability seems to be one that will increase your vulnerability to be more symptomatic in a brain injury and decrease your ability to recover.
All right, thank you. Now, with respect, there's a VA record, and it's been mentioned in this trial so far. February 2, 2016, roughly 4 weeks, give or take, prior to the ski accident. And Terry Sanderson says in that record, I feel like an old man. I may not be quoting that absolutely correctly. Is that relevant to this case, and does it affect your opinions in any way? Explain.
It doesn't affect my opinions.
Okay.
It reinforces my reasons for not questioning providers. It reinforces my reasons for why an evaluation has to require some face-to-face interaction. Because here we sit trying to understand what this man meant by that statement, and we try and piece together context. Oh, they were discussing his weight or his exercise or his age. But in the end, we really don't know. And for me, for a 70, what was he at the time, a 70-year-old man, to say I'm starting to feel a little old.
73.
Say he was 73 at the time?
Yeah. Well, at the time of, well, let's see.
When he was at the
69,
VA?
69.
Yeah, he was 69.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be unexpected for him to tell his physician, you know, I'm starting to feel a little old, I'm slowing down. We don't know what took place. Maybe the physician then said, well, are you skiing less? And Terry would have said maybe no. Are you doing less volunteer work? Maybe Terry would have said no. We weren't there. And my experience as a provider, because I spend the majority of my time working with people, is I don't write everything down. I'm not, every case is not a forensic matter in which I make note of every indication. They could have had a long conversation about the fact that, yeah, he was feeling old, but he was still doing all the things he did before. I don't know.
Let's suppose that the context, and we'll see this later, but in that same visit, he says, I'm eating out too much, I'm not exercising enough. Is that significant?
Significant of what?
To connect why he's feeling old.
You're going to have to ask him.
Okay.
Because again, I don't know the context with which he offered those opinions.
All right. But that could be relevant, could it not?
It could be relevant to his post-accident problems?
No. Why he's feeling old on February 2.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You're making a cause and effect connection. He's not exercising, he's not eating, and therefore he says, it's an indication I'm getting old. I don't have the energy to do what I did before, but I'm not depressed, which I think is something else was mentioned. Yeah, it could be relevant.
And he has a plan to deal with it.
He has a plan to deal with it according to what he tells the physician, yes.
Okay. I read in a 2010 article something about, and this was dealing with neuropsychological assessment of the orbital and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Those are a lot of complicated words. I'm a simple country lawyer. Explain to me what that means.
Front of the brain.
Okay? Very simple. All right.
Very simple. There's different parts of the front of the brain, but it's the front of the brain. The last evolving parts of our brain, the most recently evolving parts of our brain, and older animals don't have very big frontal lobes. They evolved later on, and they're the seat of rationality. So they're the logical parts of the brain, as opposed to the middle parts of the brain, which are more emotionally driven. Babies are born like Klingons. 2-year-olds look like they have bipolar disorder because it's the middle of the brain that runs the show for them. And maturation is about the front of the brain both myelinating, the nerves growing sheaths so they fire properly, but also about acquiring the knowledge to think before you act and not just always brain dance, which is a term I use, to act just on emotion.
Now, if this article hypothetically says that paper and pencil tests of these areas do not capture the range of real-world abnormalities exhibited by these patients. These tests don't capture the real-world abnormalities exhibited by these patients. What does that mean to you, and is it significant in this case?
Well, it's significant in this case, and it's what I've just testified to, and that is, and you're using the term paper and pencil, I would prefer to say the battery of neuropsychological tests, not the questionnaires completed by family members, because one of the things I do as part of an assessment is I always want to talk to a family member, if it's the parent of a child or a teacher or a spouse, because particularly in this kind of a problem, the way the person sees themselves is often not the way other people see them, and that person is often confused about why other people don't want to talk to them or be with them or respond the way they do to them because their insight is limited. Another limitation of a front of the brain injury.
Okay. You were asked about the VA assessments done, I think before and after Terry's ski collision, ski crash. Are your opinions in contradiction with those of the VA people that looked at him? Why or why not?
Looked at him immediately following the accident?
Well, yeah, within the next year and a half.
No, they're relative to this matter, I don't have an opinions about his other medical problems, but
Understand that.
relative to this matter,
matter.
they're not different, no.
Okay. In your opinion, what effect did the ski collision and what happened to him there have to do with his stress and anxiety?
Well, I think two things happened to him. I think one, that, and we've already talked a little bit about it, this was a man who was talkative, boisterous, a little over the top at times, and that pattern, because of his frontal lobe injury, accelerated to the point where after 15 minutes it's hard to have a conversation with him because he's repetitive and goes around in circles, and he's very bright and very intellectual if you're discussing some intellectual matter, but when you're discussing his state of affairs, his personal life, he obsesses about it. And the second thing I think that's happened to him is his mind, meaning the way he comes to think about what's happening to him in his life. And some of that may be from brain injury, some of that's just his lifetime personality style, but he has become obsessed with trying to return himself to the level of functioning he perceived he had before this accident. And I make no judgment.
Doing what now? Say that again.
His assessment of the life he had before.
He's obsessed with getting back to that.
He's obsessed with getting back to that. He and I had a discussion that not every problem he encountered in everyday life, when he couldn't remember where he put his keys, not every problem was a consequence of injuries suffered in this accident. Some of that was just normal aging. For me, the primary consequence was his emotional and behavioral regulation, and then the impact it had on his mind, his perception of who he is and who he was. From his view, he is not the person he was. From his view, he has lost Terry Sanderson. And this is what he said to me at one point when I interviewed him.
Okay, now, is there any cure for a concussion? Is there any cure for a mild traumatic brain injury?
Cure meaning a treatment that makes it get better?
Yeah.
Not as far as I'm aware. No, there are treatments that can help you recover acquired knowledge, which is different from ability. There are activities that could help you make more of whatever you have, improve your memory, as it were. But we don't really know of any way to force the brain to heal itself. Again, as I've testified, it's not an arm or a leg. Evolution doesn't afford the opportunity by natural selection for people whose arms were injured and healed better to then have offspring, and others who didn't to not have offspring. In this case, people with brain injuries up until just recently in history died. So the brain doesn't really know how to heal itself.
Now, this kind of a mild traumatic brain injury, is it going to show up on every MRI you do?
No.
Why?
Well, from my view, the MRI is like looking at the moon with binoculars.
Okay.
You're not looking at a cellular level. You're not evaluating how brain cells fire, how many dendrites are connected to how many other dendrites, how axons work. I think Dr. Gibby testified some to that. But again, we're talking about a system of over 100 billion moving parts.
Does Terry Seen, a psychologist at the VA, well, I don't know if it's the VA or not, named Sievers, are you aware of that?
Terry sees
Yeah.
Dr. Siebers. She's a board-certified neuropsychologist. She sees him in counseling. Dr. Siebers works for Intermountain Healthcare, and she works with brain-injured patients as a therapist.
Does that kind of therapy help?
Your Honor, may we approach? Sure.
Thank you. You can stretch your legs.
Your Honor, if I may, I usually would come back. I'm doing a TED Talk tomorrow.
Okay, all right.
So I don't have any flex. I can go back Friday.
Address the Sievert, do we need to address it any further? Are you going to go into it any more, Mr. Sykes?
all I was gonna ask him to do in the first place was, does neuropsychological, treatment help Terry cope? That's it.
Are you going to go into it anymore
No,
by
no,
name?
No,
Sieverts by name?
no.
Okay,
That's totally.
okay,
So we want to get done with the doctor today,
right.
and he wants to, and I'm sure Bob wants to. All we're asking for is equal time. So if he's been going,
1
certainly,
hour so far.
did you verify that, or is that just?
I had it written in my notes, 2:45 is when he started.
Okay, I believe you. And
Let's not forget, Your Honor, that we wasted an hour, almost an hour and a half.
No, we're not talking about that, we're talking about
I
this.
know, we wasted an hour and a half.
Don't conflate the two. We can deal with that issue if you'd like, but what I want to do is, on a pragmatic level, figure out how to complete this witness.
so let's just hear a commitment, like I'm gonna take 5 more minutes, or I'm gonna take 10 more minutes. But certainly we gotta take over by 4. If we take over by 4, we'll be okay. Is that fair? Sure.
All right, so if you can wrap up by 4 o'clock, Mr. Sykes, will be good. We'll get the jury in here as quickly as possible.
I mean, this is one of my most important witnesses, and we're short because of what happened this morning. That's the problem. You know, so I'm trying my best to do it, I really am,
Okay.
you know.
Would you let the other bailiff know that as soon as the jury is ready to bring them in? Thank you. right. Let the record reflect parties and counsel are present. You may be seated. Members of the jury are all here. We're on our last stretch of the day. Mr. Sykes, you may proceed.
Doctor? Excuse me, I'm going to skip a bunch of this stuff here and talk about in May of 2020, and I'm referring, if you want to go to page 29 of your report. You listed a lot of problems there. Excuse me. Would you mind telling the jury, as of May of 2020, your assessment of Terry's problems? Tell the jury.
His problems in everyday life?
Yeah. As mentioned on page 29 of your report.
Do you want me to read from the report, or you want me to just tell you what I thought?
Tell me what they are.
Well, at the time, it was my opinion that there was a significant and acute adverse change in this man's everyday life, that a particular event, either the experience of it or the physical trauma ensuing as a consequence of it, had caused a significant change in this man's, in this man's everyday life, and it manifested itself primarily as a change in his behavior.
Well, identify the problems that you wrote there. Or, tell you what, I'll
Well-
just read them and ask you if this is one you identified.
Sure.
Difficulty remembering important things to do.
Yes.
Difficult remembering names of people.
Right. Again, these are the things he reported to me.
Yeah. Staying involved in activities due to fatigue.
Yes.
Cognition problems.
He reported that to me. Yes.
Attention problems.
Yes.
Memory problems.
Yes.
Frustration.
Yes.
Learning new information.
Yes.
Meeting daily responsibilities.
Yes.
Health maintenance.
Yes.
Excessively talkative.
Yes.
You observed that, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Understanding directions.
Yes.
Switching attention from one stimulus to another.
Yes.
Depression.
Yes.
Now, are there any other problems that come to your mind of what you found or observed in your May 2020 evaluation?
Well, and again, the list you just provided was what he told me, and I tried to help him understand that some of those items on the list I thought were a consequence of his brain injury. Some of them I thought were a consequence of how his mind was processing what was going on in his life.
Okay.
And some of those I thought were just the process of normal aging. That there wasn't any indication that he couldn't learn new information. He thought he couldn't learn new information.
Very good. You gave him your executive function test, right?
That's the questionnaire that he filled out, but he also took a number of other face-to-face measures during testing.
What percentile did you rank him after looking at everything that he answered in your own evaluation? I'm talking about page. Anyway, do you remember the percentile you gave him?
Sure, and just as foundation, this is an instrument that he fills out. It asks questions about strategy, how you manage attention, manage your emotions, whether you start things, how you plan. So it's his self-report. There is, and you asked me about validity measures, there is a check in there. I developed this instrument. It's used very widely.
It's used worldwide now, isn't
It's
it?
used all over, yeah, and in multiple languages. There's a check in there to see if someone's over-reporting, making themselves look too good, or
Right.
under-reporting, trying to make themselves or look too bad or look too good. He didn't indicate that. Based on his self-assessment, he was in the bottom 16% for individuals of his age matched for the census. So we matched to the census because we want to wash out differences in terms of education or ethnicity or where you live in the country.
So this is a man who was a former captain in the U.S. Army. He ran a eye clinic, ran two clinics in southern Idaho, optometry clinics, and he's in the 16th percentile. for
Right, low
executive-
average.
For executive function.
Low average, again, based upon his self-reports compared to a normative sample.
And I want to ask you, we're going to have Terry in here day after tomorrow. You're going to testify. I'd like you to talk to the jury about what, and this is the, I'm going to end with this, the kind of things we might expect to see. And I'm just going to ask you about some of these things. I'll ask you to define some for the jury because they won't know what it means, okay? Some of them won't. And then tell me if we're going to see that with Terry's testimony and why. Perseveration. First of all, what is perseveration?
So, I don't mean to be unresponsive, but you use the word see. What you will see is a good-looking gentleman of 76 years of age.
Right.
He will be dressed appropriately. His hygiene will be good. He will present himself as very normal. He clearly, from some of the things he will say, it'll reflect an intelligent person. That's what you will see. What you will hear is a challenge in a variety of ways in his ability to stay on task, to answer the questions, not because he's evasive, but because he's obsessive in his thinking. To come to your question, perseveration means you go over something again and again and again, and Terry will tell you that. I just feel like I have to tell you again, even though you tell him, I got it, you've already told me 3 times. It's not enough for him.
Inappropriate repetition.
Correct, inappropriate repetition. Inability to take the perspective of the other person and appreciate, they already got this, I can move on.
Is the jury likely to see that with him?
Yes,
Okay, what about overly talkative?
I think we're the time we're supposed to take over, Your Honor.
All right, we'll let you finish this line of questioning. Go ahead.
That's all I'm doing. How about overly talkative?
yes.
Okay? How about irrelevant?
Irrelevant in the sense that you'll ask him a question and his answer will be unresponsive. His answer will be about something tangential to whatever the question is.
How about indirect answers?
Indirect meaning he has to go to China to get across the street.
Yeah?
He may do that, yes.
Is that a frontal lobe problem?
Yes,
Are all these frontal lobe problems?
yes.
What about digression? What is digression, and are they likely to see that?
The colloquial is I digress, meaning we're discussing a particular topic and suddenly I'm talking about something else.
Yeah. All right. Confabulation. First of all, define for the jury confabulation. And are we likely to see that?
Well, some people call that honest lying,
Okay?
meaning you're not telling the truth, but you really believe you are.
Are we
And
likely to see that with Terry?
you could very well see that with Terry, yes.
Is that a frontal lobe problem?
It's a frontal lobe problem.
Combativeness.
I'm afraid we're just gonna keep going. But the judge has made a ruling.
I have, and you'll get equal time.
Combativeness.
I don't know in this environment he'll be openly combative. I think he has enough self-regulation that he'll respect the order of the court and the judge. I don't think he'll argue with you or be inappropriate in his behavior. I think what the jury will see is what appears to be a very normal man.
Lack of insight.
Yes,
Is that a frontal lobe problem?
yes,
Okay, and that means, in respect to Terry, inability to see what other people are seeing?
I think in the end, his inability to take the perspective of others, we sometimes call that theory of mind, to understand what someone is thinking or what they're feeling. He has a difficult time doing that. He can do it for brief periods, and then he forgets it, and he goes right back to where he was.
How about missing the central point?
It depends what we're talking about.
Okay?
If we're talking about eyes, given his vocational history, he very well understands the central point in visual issues. If we're talking about the reasons for his challenges in his behavior, he doesn't get it.
Okay. And I don't know if I ever got this out. Is neuropsychological counseling important? This is my last question. Is neuropsychological counseling important for Terry? Will he benefit from that?
Yes.
Okay. And just how will he benefit from that? What's the benefit going to look like?
Someone to talk to that he believes understands him, and hopefully along the way helps him come up with some solutions to be happier and live a little more functionally.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Spilton. That's all I have.
Defendant, Mr. Egan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello, Dr. Goldstein.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you again. You testified previously that you've read the depositions of the daughters of Mr. Sanderson. Is that correct?
I believe I testified to that in my deposition, yes.
Right. And in that reading, do you recall reading that Jenny, the youngest of the daughters, did not feel loved or nurtured by her father growing up?
As we sit here, I don't recall it, but I don't have any reason to disagree.
Okay. And then did you read that Mr. Sanderson was domineering and emotionally and verbally abusive to Jenny and her mother, Tana?
That was in the deposition, yes.
Okay. And then Mr. Sanderson placed a strong emphasis on discipline. Do you remember reading that?
Yes,
And that he became frustrated if his expectations were not met.
yes,
And that this is all before the accident, correct?
correct.
And he, after Jenny graduated from high school, she and her father did not speak for 13 years. Do you recall reading that?
Correct, and I think he
Yeah,
currently
it's-
has some disagreement with her as well.
Okay, yes. And Mr. Sanderson is controlling and relentlessly tries to mold Jenny. Do you remember reading anything like that?
Yes,
Okay. And that he oversteps boundaries that she sets.
yes,
In the report that you provided that has been referenced a little bit here, you go over the records that you reviewed and found significant. You put them in a kind of long document where you describe what you found in those records, correct?
correct. Sometimes I quote them exactly and I put quotations.
Right.
Sometimes I paraphrase.
Right, and in the and it's and by the way, do you have your report there with you?
I do.
And then do you have your deposition transcript as well?
I do.
Oh, you do. Oh, great. You're very prepared. Thank you.
I am.
And so on page 5, and I guess it's page 4 and 5 of your report, which is an exhibit to that deposition, I noted that there were just 2 records that you noted pre-incident. One on July 30th, 2013, and then one on March 6th, 2015. Do you see that?
Correct.
Okay, and then I wanted to return to this testimony I think you offered earlier that, and correct me if I'm offering a misunderstanding. I believe you said that the primary, or at least an important part of Mr. Sanderson's symptoms is emotional regulation problems. Is that correct?
Correct.
Would you say primary problem?
I don't know if I said primary, but it's in that constellation of frontal lobe problems.
Okay, and that's a really a big part of what he's struggling with. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and in some prior VA records, which I believe you read, correct? There were a lot of them, I understand, but
So the VA records, I have a correspondence from October 8th, 2020 to Mr. Bueller. The VA records were provided to me after I evaluated Mr. Sanderson, but before you took my deposition.
okay, got it. And so in those records, for example, this one's bait stamped VA1131. I don't know that you would have it right in front of you. Don't expect that, but I'm wondering if you recall this, given that you were focused on emotional regulation. There was a record, I believe, from 2009, in which a provider mentioned that the patient, Mr. Sanderson, mentioned that he had noticed he was easy to anger. Do you remember seeing records like that?
Yes.
And that he got angry at his girlfriend's children?
Yes.
Okay. And he became angry when he was discussing a family conflict.
Yes.
And that he would get angry and kind of defensive at first was his affect.
I don't remember that, but I'll take your word for it. But I remember
Okay.
the first part.
Okay, sure. And then another comment was the patient's desire to feel justified in his anger and stand up for his girlfriend was also discussed.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, and then another record says, and this one is from, I don't know if you noticed, but these VA records are kind of hard to follow because they don't start with the date at the top. They're just kind of
A lot of times they're hard to obtain.
you know, scrolling. Yes, that is also true. So the another record from 2009, the patient mentioned difficulty with anger management. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And then another note was that he has begun to speak more directly about how he is feeling, but he still struggles with self-disclosure. He's self-focused rather than other-focused. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And then for example, when asked how he feels, he often responds with, I feel that she is, and then there's an ellipsis. Do you remember that?
Correct. Yeah.
So the focus of the session was to help him identify his responses and the associated feelings and communicate those in less blaming ways. Do you remember seeing that?
Correct. To take responsibility for his role in whatever conflicts were occurring.
Right, right. And then another note, the patient noted that his interaction style and way of dealing with people often, quote, get him into trouble, and he would like to gain greater insight into his interpersonal difficulties. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, and this is all before the accident.
Correct.
In another session, he said he would like to address anger issues and interpersonal problems that he believes affect his interactions. Do you remember
Correct.
records like that?
Yes.
Patient also has a recent number of stressors, which he appeared to minimize, and is also denying significant depressive symptoms. Do you remember those sorts of things?
Correct. The latter is, again, an interpretation, and we can go back and look at it. Sometimes clinicians perceive that a patient is more depressed than the patient reports, and then you have to try to decide what to do about that.
Right. Okay, I think we've covered those. There was another record beforehand, which has already been discussed. That February 2nd, 2016 record, just weeks before the ski accident. Do you recall talking about that?
Yes.
I didn't see that in this note here where you noted things prior, but perhaps it's because you didn't have them.
Correct.
I will note, however, that the two that you did note are VA records.
Those are the ones I had.
Okay, so you just didn't have all of them.
However, I had them.
Okay, got it. And the February 2nd note, in addition to saying that he was getting old all of a sudden, it says that he no longer does things that he used to do. Do you remember that?
Correct.
Okay. And do you remember that he was retired for a number of years before the ski accident? Is
Yes. Yeah, 6, 7 years at least.
Yeah, and so he wasn't managing a business and those sorts of things anymore, correct?
Correct.
He wasn't in the Air Force at that time, correct?
Correct. He had no vocational responsibilities as far as I was aware.
Right.
He had maintained his license, he told me, but he
Okay.
wasn't working.
Okay, got it. I believe you said that you're making no judgment, you have no opinion really about his prior function. You don't know what it was, correct?
Well, I know what it was to the extent that we've talked about it,
Okay,
but I'm not making any judgment as to the breadth and scope of the things we've just talked about. How it impacted his everyday life, I don't have any opinion other than what was reported to me, that it wasn't affecting his everyday life.
right. And you said earlier maybe it was higher before the ski accident, correct?
Correct.
But his function also could have been the same and you wouldn't know, correct?
Correct.
Have you testified previously that Terry thinks he's the smartest guy in the room?
Yes.
And so any little deficit, whether it's from his accident or from something else or from normal aging, distresses him?
Correct. That's the mind part that I testified to earlier.
Right. And you say that relative to other people his age, he tests exceptionally well, I think is the word you use. Is that correct?
In terms of his intellect and neuropsychological abilities and academic achievement, and just basic functioning in a controlled laboratory setting, yes.
Right. And that is after the accident, correct?
Correct.
Did you see any neuropsychological evaluations before the accident?
I'm trying to remember. I think he had some testing before. I'm trying to remember, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
I know he had a battery of tests in 2017, which would be after,
Right.
and he saw a speech pathologist. but I don't recall if when he was scanned earlier before that period of time, whether he had some cognitive testing or not. I
Right.
don't recall.
So you couldn't take the post-accident evaluations and compare them to prior ones. You didn't have any prior ones.
No, but I have no reason. What I did was look at his 2017 versus mine and didn't see any progression. So I don't have any reason to think that he has a progressive illness in terms of his brain functioning.
Right. And I think you've said, you've testified that his overall cognitive functioning is not significantly impaired relative to people of his same profile. Is that right?
It's not impaired, it's better.
Yeah. I believe you have also previously testified that it's important to diagnose a concussion as close to an accident as possible. Is that correct?
Correct, and preferably by a medically trained expert.
Right, and that's because the more time between the accident and the diagnosis, the more time there is for other contributing factors to kind of muddy your analysis. Is that correct?
Correct, particularly pain.
Right. And I guess while we're on that point, do you remember in that record that we pulled up, there's a report from a Deer Valley person who responded, the first kind of responder to Mr. Sanderson, Whitney Smith, I think we'll hear from her later in the trial, that there was a box there in that report that said concussion and it was not checked. Did you see that?
Correct.
Okay. And did you see anything in her report where she said he lost consciousness?
No.
Okay. And I think you've made this clear, but just in case it's not, you don't yourself have any opinion about whether there was a concussion. You're just deferring to the people that have diagnosed him in the records, correct?
Correct.
Right. And that would be the same as to sort of a post-concussive syndrome or persisting concussion symptoms, correct?
Well, that would be a little different.
Oh, okay.
Because the persistence would be based on reports of his or others in regards to his behavior. So when he sees me, the kinds of things he reports are consistent with people who have persistent post-concussion, meaning that small group of people who don't recover for reasons that we don't always understand.
Right, I see. It's because it's a little different because now you've actually evaluated him.
Correct.
Okay, but isn't it true that you don't have any opinion about who was responsible for the accident, correct?
Correct. I have nothing to do with the accident.
Right, I mean, you haven't read Ms. Paltrow's deposition, analyzed the evidence about the ski accident, anything like that, correct?
Correct. He could have slipped and fallen in the laundry room for all I know. Doesn't matter.
And he also could have had this concussion from himself causing the accident, correct?
Sure. And I guess anything's possible.
Sure. Did you note that, I think you've actually previously testified that he actually reported feeling better a couple weeks after the collision, is that correct?
He did, yes.
And that over time, his psychological state became the much stronger driver of his problems than his neurological state, is that correct?
Correct. Just so that the jury, if I may add, just
Yeah,
so the
sure,
jury
you
understands.
can explain that.
It's what
sure.
we talked about a minute ago, the difference between what the brain injury caused him in terms of his frontal lobe or orbital frontal lobe problems with emotional regulation and anger. And here what we're seeing from the data you've provided is an exacerbation of those problems to a point where it's significantly disrupting his life. The second part of it that you alluded to is his mind. That as time goes on, he's more and more unhappy and frustrated about what he perceives to be a significant change in his life.
And on that perceived to be point, you're taking this report from him, obviously. Seems like that's all you can do is hear his self-report and understand that he's reporting this change in function and this difficulty coping. Is that correct?
Correct. And I've read, for example, the deposition of the woman who was with him for 18 months before and then after. I think the jury has heard testimony about her opinions. But again, these kinds of problems can only be found in observation. We don't have neuropsychological tests for the kinds of problems that Terry experiences. It's real life that reflects that. And I think as the jury is hearing, he may well have had some of these kinds of issues before that accelerated after, for reasons that I think are a combination initially of pain and a brain injury and his mind.
And to stick with his perception for a little bit longer, I believe you've testified before that the primary concern that he had about the accident, as he reported it to you, were the events after the collision. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so he felt like he was abandoned on the slope, and he kind of obsessed about that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that was driving anxiety and some of these other emotional difficulties.
At what point driving it? The day when I see him?
Yeah, at the point you were talking to. Yeah, thank you for giving us
At the
that
point I
point.
see him, it's multiple years after. And what drives it at that point is probably a combination of things, not just his perception that he was skied into and then the person who skied into him lacked remorse or didn't support him, or I think that was kind of his initial view of it. But over time, his perception of his dysfunction in his everyday life became a much bigger issue. I think if the person who allegedly skied into him apologized, I don't think it would solve his problems today.
Okay, so did you testify previously that from his view, because this person skied into him and didn't have the respect to stop and help him or acknowledge the problem, and as time has gone on, he's become increasingly obsessed with this entire issue?
Correct.
And that psychologically that's his biggest problem right now. Obviously that was not this moment in time.
Right now, meaning at the time at the time I saw him. I mean,
Yeah.
chronologically, I'm testifying about the time I saw him.
Right, just a few years ago.
I have had conversations with him since then, but I haven't testified about those conversations.
Right. I believe you've testified before that he did not report to you that he had felt a sudden decline in cognitive function the weeks before the collision. Is that correct?
Correct.
But there was that record that we've gone over, and you hadn't seen it yet when you evaluated him about this change in being able to do things that he liked to do a few weeks before the collision. Is that right?
Correct, and probably would have been fortuitous had I seen it, because maybe I'd be better prepared to tell you what he would have told me about why he said that.
So I think you've also previously testified that this obsessing over the accident is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's a quotation from your transcript here that I'm reading. Do you recall that?
Correct.
And you say, as time goes on, it maybe in part becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because no one sits him down and says, hey, look, you had some of these problems before. The accident is a catalyst, but really not a primary cause of some of your difficulties, you know. Do you recall saying that?
Correct, and we were talking in that case about, for example, his reports of problems with memory or new learning, which, again, the test data suggests he's capable of doing those things.
Yeah, and then I believe you were aware of Dr. Fong's evaluation, correct?
Correct.
And Dr. Fong reported that she had received a report from Mr. Sanderson that he'd fallen a number of years after the accident, hit his head, and was unconscious for 45 minutes. Do you recall that?
Well, I was in court this morning when it came up, and as I sat in court, I did not recall it, and I don't recall that we discussed it in my deposition. And so I'd want to know the chronology of when that event occurred and the time I saw him.
So we could go to your deposition. It's page 58 and 59 is where we discussed it. So if you go to the bottom of page 58, you see where the question starts. You said
You're right. You're
yeah,
correct, yes.
you're
I
seeing
apologize.
that. No, that's fine. So you'd read that this report had been made, but you had not received a report about that, correct?
Correct. He didn't tell me about it, and I didn't see any medical records reflecting it.
Right, and you thought that if it's that severe, if he was out for 45 minutes, that there should probably be a medical record, correct?
Correct, and we'd have to consider the possible contribution of that event to his problems. Again, the chronology, I still don't know when he saw Dr. Fong versus when he said he had that accident.
Yeah, I can proffer to you that it was at the time of Dr. Fong's deposition, he had reported it to her, and that was a few years
A-
ago.
But he reported it to her as occurring before the
It
skiing
was after
accident?
after the accident.
After the
Do you
skiing
recall
accident.
that?
Yeah, so that would be after the skiing accident. This sounds like a Laurel and Hardy movie here. But after the skiing accident, but before he saw me.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, yeah, it's important information.
Yeah.
I really don't know anything about it.
And he did not tell you about it.
Correct.
Right. So it sounds like you made a couple recommendations, which you don't usually do, you said, correct?
Correct. I was asked to write a letter to his treater at the VA for him.
Yeah.
And I first checked with counsel, because I'm not a treater. Counsel indicated that would be fine, and I sent a letter. I believe it was in June of 2020.
And you recommended counseling for depression and anxiety, correct?
Correct.
And part of that was you thought that if you could get some of that under control, you'd have a better idea of actually what was going on with these problems, a better understanding of the cause, correct?
Correct.
Because it's still not totally clear.
Correct. A better understanding, at least, of the variables that were impeding him from at least returning in part to the life that he had, by his view, from before.
Right. And then you also recommended, I'm going to butcher this, it is cholinesterase?
A cholinesterase inhibitor.
Cholinesterase.
And your one of your, I think, neuropsychology record reviewers questioned me about that. If you think someone has, so cholinesterase inhibitors, we think slow down the formation of plaques, which contribute to early aging of the brain. It's not clear that those plaques are the cause of dementia. Now we know maybe we were wrong about this, but they do slow the process down some. And so if his problems were in any way progressive, meaning he had vulnerability, he had an accident, excuse me, made him worse, but now it's going to continue progressing, the cholinesterase inhibitor was a reasonable prophylactic, something we might do just to protect him. There were no side effects from it, but recommending that doesn't mean that I thought his problems were from Alzheimer's.
You just thought it may be from aging, so let's give him this just in case.
Just in case, right, sure.
Because you recognize that's a possibility.
Correct.
Right. If you previously testified that you do not have an opinion at all about the cause of plaintiff's injuries.
That's correct.
I believe you've testified before, and this maybe you've already gone over a little bit. Oh, do you need some more
Can I
water?
get a little more water?
Yeah, of course, we'll grab
Thank you. Just a cup would be fine.
May I approach, Your Honor? You may give this man some
Thank you very much.
water. There you go. And by the way, I believe that Mr. Sanderson reported that the fall that we've been discussing that he reported to Fong was a result of dehydration. You just reminded me of that. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay.
I recall because I just looked at it in the deposition.
Okay, so I think you previously testified that Mr. Sanderson's self-perception was based on his feelings and the conclusions he's drawn, not that you've drawn, but he's drawn about the cause of the accident, correct?
Correct.
And that his everyday functioning was not a function of lack of intellect or lack of memory capacity for his age or a lack of neuropsychological ability. Is that right?
Correct.
And you told him that over time that you felt like he had elevated himself to a point where any little thing, he had elevated, let me read this again, I butchered it. I told him that over time, I felt like he had elevated himself to a point where any little thing he had trouble remembering or doing was in his mind the trigger, immediately caused frustration, and was attributed to the injuries from the accident. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
I believe you've also testified that over time, you say that maybe some of his problem is from aging, correct?
Sure. When you hit 70, your memory and other functioning can go down at an accelerated rate.
And that the bigger problem is his mindset about how his life has been affected, correct?
So let me just clarify.
Okay, but you did say that. Is
I
that
did
right?
say that,
Yeah.
yes, and I'm just clarifying it within that context, not to be defensive, but that, as I've already testified, I think, you know, there's a brain injury and there's a mind injury. And the mind injury is more emotional or psychological in the sense of what his mind chooses to think about those events and subsequently his life and what's happened. And what I suggested was that at that moment in time, if I could help his mind look at his life a little differently, then I think he could function quite a bit better. He could return to doing some of the things that he had done before. I don't think it's going to change his personality style, which I think has been adversely affected, or at least as we've discussed it, amplified as a consequence of this frontal lobe injury.
I believe you've testified before that he has never told you that the issue is that for him is that Miss Paltrow hit him on purpose. Do you recall testifying about that?
Yes.
So in other words, he never said, I'm mad, she did this on purpose, it's affecting me. Nothing like that, correct?
No. We've all been skied into at one point or another, living in Utah.
Yeah, and in fact, he said that he knows it was an accident.
Correct.
Right. And I think there was a little bit of discussion earlier about speeds. I think it was kind of in a hypothetical. You have no opinion about how fast someone's going. You said 40 miles an hour, or these kind of things. You don't know what it was on the slopes that day, right?
Correct. What I was offering was the nature of brain injuries today. I mean, if you were moving 50 miles an hour 300 years ago, you were falling off a cliff. So the brain, we didn't have those kinds of brain injuries. So it's a fairly new phenomena to try and understand injuries to the brain that come from movement as opposed to adverse blows to the outside of the skull.
And this probably has been mentioned before, but Mr. Sanderson has been described by Craig Ramone, whose deposition I believe you've read, as someone that could talk to a wall for a few hours and have a pretty good conversation, something to that effect. Do you recall that?
Yes.
I sometimes worry that that's said about me, but do you? And yeah, and that was before the accident, correct?
Correct. And again, we would, you'd have to ask the witness what he meant by that, because it could have been a perfectly cogent conversation,
Sure.
where you just don't let anybody else speak, or it could have been a circular, irrational, confabulating conversation. And I think that's what's pointed out is he still speaks a lot, but now when he speaks in circles, and perhaps he didn't do that before.
Right, but you don't know he could have done that before.
Correct.
And because of his talkativeness and his anxiety, he actually had to come back and do a second and even maybe a third day evaluation with you. Is that right?
Correct, because he wouldn't stop talking.
Right, and that wasn't a typical process. Is that right? It's usually one day.
It's usually 1 or 2 days, but it's not uncommon for people with frontal lobe injuries.
Okay, to have 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, because they have to talk about everything.
I think I'm getting close to finishing here. I think you testified earlier that you focus in your practice on children and their psychology. Is that right?
In my clinical practice, yeah, 2/3. I think in my deposition I said it's about 50-50 for forensics, but in looking back on it, it's 2/3 in clinical practice at least. The adults I see tend to be in 2 categories: younger adults, people I followed growing up with genetic disorders, and then the other group are people with early onset dementia. So there is a more virulent form of dementia that people get for reasons we don't understand in their 50s, and they decline very quickly and typically pass away in just a few years.
And you don't. So is it fair to say you don't typically evaluate someone of Mr. Sanderson's profile?
In a forensic setting or in a clinical setting?
Let's answer both ways.
In a forensic setting, yes.
Okay.
In a clinical setting, not that often, because again, he goes to the VA, or people go to IHC, to their insurance provider. I'm an independent provider, so I might not. I could see somebody like him, but probably not.
Okay.
It's more likely that someone like Dr. Siebers would see him.
Okay. I think that's all my questions. Thank you, Dr. Goldstein.
Welcome.
Appreciate your candor.
Sure.
I guess it's not.
Now it's ganging up. It's 2-on-1 here.
Okay. Oh, this is to clarify something that has come up a few times, but maybe the stratification, or I don't know if that's the right term, but the different categories of traumatic brain injuries. You've described Mr. Sanderson's as mild, but there are mild, moderate, and severe categorizations that people use. Is that correct?
Correct. And those categorizations, so the jury understands, typically refer to the damage done to the brain, not necessarily to the consequences of that damage. And it's a paradox in our field that often people with mild brain injuries report more everyday problems than people with moderate to severe brain injuries. We don't completely understand why that is. We can offer or proffer some ideas. Typically, people with mild brain injuries go right back to their previous life, but are compromised and experience consequences. Moderate to severe brain injuries, typically people have a long period of recovery. They don't return to normal life. But we don't really understand. Again, I've been a bit wordy here. His problem is a mild brain injury based on a coma score, based on a cram score, based on his presentation at the scene, based on the fact his skull wasn't broken, he didn't have a brain bleed. It's a mild injury.
And I think you said earlier that the vast majority, I can't remember if you gave a percentage, maybe even 90% plus of these mild traumatic brain injuries usually resolve and don't have those persisting symptoms. Is that correct?
Based on patient report, that's correct. And we don't understand that 15 or 20%. Sometimes they have pre-existing problems that are exacerbated by their brain injury, making it harder to recover. Sometimes their clean one owners don't have any problem and it's hard to explain. Sometimes they have other life stresses that intermix with their brain injury. Sometimes they have other issues that have nothing to do with their brain injury, and in particular, often they have chronic pain. And patients with chronic pain, over time, when it doesn't remit, will report a constellation of symptoms that are very identical to post-concussion. But it's pain-related.
When Mr. Sanderson has spoken to you about the accident, has he discussed whether his understanding of it comes mainly from Mr. Ramon, or whether he has specific memories of it himself?
I haven't had that conversation with him, other than he telling me every time I've spoken to him over the last 3 years that he just remembers somebody standing over him screaming at him. Even when I haven't asked him about it, he's told me about it.
I see. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you. Oh, and that was a male ski patrol or ski instructor?
I don't know who that was.
Okay.
I mean, he told me that's who it was, but I don't have an independent knowledge of who that person was standing over him.
Right. I figured.
That's
And you
what he
don't know
told me.
And you don't know the sex of that person?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Sykes, any follow-up?
I've got a very few questions. I think the jury's going home early tonight, would appear. Dr. Goldstein, you and I had a discussion about whether Terry should be in the courtroom during this trial, did we not?
Correct.
What's your advice? What was your advice to Terry?
My advice was that he shouldn't be in the courtroom.
Why?
I think he would have trouble listening to people say things about him that he
Honor,
disagreed
I
with.
apologize for interrupting, but I'm just gathering what's going on. I believe this is beyond the scope. It's a new
Sustained?
All right. Do you think Terry would have trouble being in the courtroom?
I believe that's similarly objectionable.
on your knowledge of Terry, how does he take hearing criticism of himself?
Not well.
All right. Now, you talked about this fall, and I think the only place you saw it, 45-minute loss of consciousness, was in Dr. Fong's deposition. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. There are no other reports by Terry to anyone else about that?
Well, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah,
I only know there are no other reports in whatever materials I've been provided with.
you've read. Okay. Are there any medical records that report it?
Not that I've seen.
Is that an example of confabulation where you think something happened but it didn't?
Could be.
Yeah. And tell the jury briefly what the and there's no medical records to support that as far as you know, right?
As far as I'm aware, correct.
Tell the jury briefly what the second injury syndrome is in brain injury.
Again, I believe this is beyond the scope.
Yeah, but I was shortened, Your Honor, by quite a bit.
No, I'm asking, I have a question. Does this question relate to the 45-minute report of loss of consciousness?
Yes.
Okay,
No.
Overruled?
Go ahead.
So we're talking about a colloquial term. What happens to people who have an injury and then have another injury on top of that injury?
Yes.
Whether it's any part of the body.
Yes.
But here we're talking specifically about an injury to the brain and then a second injury to the brain.
Yes, later.
Yeah, the folklore is that the second injury will be more symptomatic, more impairing, harder to recover from because of the vulnerability created by the first injury. It's very difficult to do that research because it's hard to find people other than athletes who have chronic concussions over time. Now we're testing people like that. At some point we'll be able to demonstrate that their cognitive functioning after a second injury is more impaired than a first or a third or a fourth. And again, it's the nature of the injury. If your first injury was very severe and your next one was mild, that would be different than it was vice versa. We just don't know.
Okay, lastly, do I have you mark exhibits? Attachment exhibits?
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Exhibits you can call?
Yeah, but do you have a sticker?
How many stickers?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I do not have a sticker. Is that what you want? No.
We have stickers.
I'm going to show you what I'm going to propose with the exhibit 43, plaintiff's exhibit, and ask you to identify it before I move to have it admitted, okay? So,
Did you say 43?
43. And this is kind of marked up. I can substitute a clean copy tomorrow. But tell the jury what that is.
Mr. Sykes, could we also see it?
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
It's a cut and paste. Does the jury understand cut and paste? I think we all do nowadays. It's a cut and paste table from the computerized printout that's used to score the comprehensive executive functioning inventory, which is the questionnaire that I testified to that I've developed that is standardized on the general population. And I think we've briefly talked about it earlier. And it's, again, it's executive functioning, which we talked about even earlier, which is how you do what you do. So you get a single score, and it's made up of 9 different kind of behaviors that our research demonstrated are the 9 most common kinds of strategies or behaviors people use to function effectively in everyday life.
Okay, and this is your test that you developed and used worldwide,
It is,
and this is the report of it.
correct?
In your report that was circulated to everybody in the case, right?
It's in the body of my report. It appears on page 20 of my report. I don't know if my report's been admitted as a. It hasn't. Okay, so this is page 20 from that report. I don't remember how many pages that report is in total.
So, Your Honor, I move to have that admitted as Exhibit 43P. I should show you a copy. shouldn't I?
May we approach, Your Honor?
Sure.
Exhibit 43P, illustrate and demonstrate your testimony about executive functioning?
I don't understand the question.
Does it, you talked earlier about some of these findings.
Correct?
Does this demonstrate the findings on executive function?
That we discussed on this particular instrument,
Yes.
based upon Mr. Sanderson's self-reports,
Yes.
comparing those self-reports to a census-matched sample
Yes.
of people his age and educational background?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we would move to admit Exhibit 43 as a demonstrative exhibit.
May I see it?
And again, we would substitute, this one is all marked up by me, but we would give you a clean copy tomorrow.
And are you trying to admit the chart or the?
Just the chart, yeah.
So here it is in a clean copy, Your Honor.
All right. So the chart itself, not the narrative that's above the chart?
Oh, that too. That's part of it. But I would take that out if there's a problem with that. But this is illustrative of his testimony.
Yeah, I think it would be. It's like repeating someone's testimony in an exhibit. So I'll receive Exhibit 43P for demonstrative purposes,
Okay.
which is the part that's on the conditionally.
Okay.
That you submit to the court clerk the tabled portion of it as Exhibit 43P.
Okay, and I will strike out the paragraph.
Correct.
All right, we'll do that tomorrow. Thank you.
The word receive is different than the word admit. Intentionally, is that accurate?
It's received as a demonstrative exhibit. In that category, it's admitted as a demonstrative exhibit, both.
Okay, so we just object on hearsay grounds.
Okay, thank you.
I have one final question.
Excuse me, and the paragraph that is being excluded explains what the scores mean. So I have some concern that someone looking at this will not have any way of understanding it, but may just read this one classification, which isn't a good way of using the table, but I'll respect the court's decision. Paragraph explains what the scores mean.
Well, I've made my ruling. We can resolve this once the jury's excused.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
One final question. You mentioned 15 to 20%, almost the last question asked by Mr. James over here. What do you mean by that? Is Terry in the 15 to 20% that don't recover?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Egan?
Dr. Goldstein, you were asked about that Dr. Fong injury report, and then also this term that I'm forgetting, but it's supposed to describe how a second injury might, compound a first injury.
Right, it wasn't my term, it was counsel's term. I don't use that term.
Got it. Okay. Do you recall in reviewing Mr. Sanderson's medical history that he had a head injury when he was 10 years old?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
When after he was 10 years old, he functioned fairly well, did he not? Throughout his entire life until the ski accident.
I just object to foundation.
Sustained as to leading?
How did he function, based on what you know of him, from age 10 until age 69?
Function vocationally, personally, in what
All of the
domain?
above.
He functioned like an accomplished individual who obtained advanced degrees, worked at a high level of white-collar work, was successful in business, married a number of times, had children. There was no indication that he was any different from anyone in the general population.
Okay, maybe superior to them.
In some areas, he was more advanced than them, yes. I wouldn't use the word superior.
More advanced. Thank you.
Dr. Goldstein, I believe my last question is that all of that information about marriages, work life, that kind of stuff, that's all from Mr. Sanderson's self-report, is that correct?
Correct. I haven't looked at his vocational history or his service records, or I can only rely on what he reports to me.
Right. Okay, thank you.
No questions?
Okay. Any other witnesses for today, Mr. Sykes?
Well, we do, but there's not enough time, Judge. Unless you want to keep the jury late, which I don't want to do. We can handle her in about 20 minutes, but we'll call her tomorrow. Okay?
Thank you. So we will recess at this time until 9 a.m. tomorrow. And I think if you arrive maybe 15 minutes early, that would be a good thing. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else, but let me just repeat an admonishment to you. Before we do recess for the day, I need to remind you of the following instruction. Please do not discuss the case with anyone, including other jurors. Please don't attempt to learn anything about the case outside of the courtroom, including from other jurors. Please avoid radio, TV, the internet, and newspaper reports on this case. Please keep an open mind throughout the presentation of the evidence. And finally, please don't form or express an opinion on this case until such time as it is finally submitted to you for deliberations. So have a nice evening. Thank you. Sure. Okay. You may. So looking at 43P, it's a demonstrative exhibit, so any use of this will, from this point forward, will be either a witness explaining what it means or counsel in closing argument explaining what it means, and they would have access, obviously, to the explanation information so that at least the lawyer would understand how it's to be presented to the jury. Does that resolve any issues that we might have concerning? Are you concerned about this demonstrative exhibit? First of all, you're the one offering it, as the court has received it in terms of just the table portion?
Well, I think that the paragraph is explanatory of the table. I like to have the whole thing admitted as demonstrative.
But normally a demonstrative exhibit would be a chart or table that sort of summarizes and helps explain the testimony.
It seems like this is part of the charter table, and that's why, but Your Honor, if you're uncomfortable with it.
Well, I just don't recall him saying any of that. That's in that explanation.
Yeah. Well.
In other words, it would be admitting hearsay as opposed to illustrating his existing testimony.
I disagree with that, but you have the black robe, not me. And so I think it helps explain the chart, and it should be in. It's not going to go back with the jury, apparently. It's demonstrative. I'd like to use it in closing argument. And so I think the whole thing should come in for that reason.
Okay. And what's the defense's position on it?
Yeah, Your Honor, I just echo what you said, which is that the paragraph, I believe, was not offered as testimony and would therefore be hearsay and should not be included.
Or the numbers.
Okay.
We don't.
Also, I guess I could say also that Dr. Goldstein did not necessarily go through all of these numbers and explain the table, and frankly, I'm not totally clear on exactly all of what it means because we didn't go through it.
It wasn't even referenced till the very end.
Well, I guess I'm comfortable with the fact that he did adopt the table portion of this exhibit. Well, he adopted the whole thing, but I'm comfortable with the fact that he did adopt it during his testimony. I think that's sufficient to allow it to be used for demonstrative purposes. It was referred to generally throughout the testimony, and so if you can clean it up, take out the top paragraph, at least what you'll show to the jury from a demonstrative standpoint should just be the table, and the lawyers or other witnesses will do with it what they can.
But then, Your Honor, when that is shown as a demonstrative exhibit, we can explain what it says in the paragraph to how to read it, right? We're not prohibited from talking about the first paragraph. won't be shown to the jury, but there's gotta be some explanation on how to interpret it.
I mean, if the lawyer, you're talking about closing argument?
Exactly.
If there aren't, I don't know the answer to that question until I hear the argument, but if the argument is supported by evidence that was admitted in court, you can certainly make the argument.
I do feel like we got broadsided on this, Your Honor. It was beyond the scope. I didn't know this was going to be suddenly like their centerpiece exhibit on the last 1 minute, or we would have talked a lot more about it. We can't just cut and paste a thing and as the last question say move to admit this. We shouldn't be able to do that with our expert either. He didn't go through this line by line.
Well, the decision was made, it was admitted. You did have the opportunity to recross on it, so the decision will stand. So, thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Oh,
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein.
Dr. Goldstein certainly can be released.
Can I weigh in for just one observation?
Sure.
What I worry about as the author of that instrument is that people will misunderstand it. And part of the reason we have so many columns there, some of them are numbers, some of them are verbal descriptions. We're looking at the same data in multiple ways, and I as the author of the instrument, I want to make sure that it's not misused. That's my only point. And even that paragraph above, to a lay person, doesn't provide enough explanation for why do you call that a weakness, or why do you say it's not a weakness, or I do think it requires some explanation.
Well, let me re-ask the question that the attorney asked you then. Do you feel as though this Exhibit 43P is illustrative of the testimony that you offered to the jury today?
Yes, because it reflects his self-reports about how he sees himself functioning in everyday life. It doesn't tell us why. It just tells us what he sees, what he reports.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Well, it seems like we ought to ask one follow-up, which is maybe he doesn't want this accepted by the court without.
No, I'll leave it. I defer to the judge. I don't have a problem with it being used. I just want to make sure that if it's shown and numbers are cited, oh, he's in the bottom 16%, that the jury has some idea of, well, what does that mean? And to me, it means his self-reports about his ability to do those kinds of things in everyday life are lower than the average person. And if that's what's said, I don't have a problem with it.
There was evidence submitted to the jury through your testimony that supports that position.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Anything else
So
for Dr. Goldstein?
No.
Okay,
Thank you, Your Honor. Nice to
thank
see
you.
again.
You too.
We have two documents that we intend, and I think tomorrow morning might be better to supplement the binders is Defense Exhibit 112, so that's come in, and then 113A is a group of VA records that were referenced today. And we'll
No, we didn't ask for them to be
Okay.
minted. I just referenced them
All right.
during cross.
So at some point we need like a long time to just do move to admit, move to admit, move to admit. We don't even need it in front of the
Ready for
jury.
that, Nat, to do that first thing in the morning, or do you want to do it first thing the next day?
First thing the next day.
Well,
we
they ought to look at
don't wanna be
113.
rushed again tomorrow, like we were today. We have some witnesses we need to get on.
I can do it after hours too. I can do it at 5 o'clock or at lunch.
Yeah, or do it early in the morning.
You just tell me, I do have a couple of things going on this week. Wasn't there an 8:30 hearing on one day? No, this week.
I don't know when.
Okay.
My brain stopped working, but I would like for tomorrow the witness lineup, please.
Mr. Sykes, witnesses for tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, just so I'm clear, when I prepare Exhibit 43P tomorrow, can I leave the paragraph in? It's not going to the jury.
Out.
Take
it
the
out.
paragraph out, okay, all right.
Witness lineup for tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Okay. We're gonna start out with a Lena Fong video deposition, which we had edited last night and today. It's probably at the office right now.
Have the defense seen the edits, and are there objections?
We haven't, Your Honor, but we would obviously like to see it.
We have to see it.
And have there been counter designations?
We would like to make counter designations. I have looked at the transcript to make those, but that was before your ruling. So I would like to now go, given your ruling, and designate what we would like to do for our process.
And do you see all of that happening before 9 o'clock tomorrow?
It depends on when I get it.
Well, yesterday, sometime between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock p.m., Pete Sorensen and Lawrence went through the entire deposition and struck out, I'm just guessing about a third of it or 40%, right?
Yeah, probably roughly about that.
Yeah. Every time that fMRI was mentioned,
Do you have a deposition, or, you know, a copy of the trial deposition with the markings on it, so you can
Yeah.
provide it to the other side?
but
To show them what you were gonna
they
cut?
could come by our office in an hour and a half or 2 hours and pick it up.
Could you send it electronically?
Probably with a drop list from there.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think we ought to kill ourselves to do this tonight, because don't we have other witnesses that can go tomorrow morning? I mean,
You asked me for my witness list, and I'm giving it to you.
let's hear it.
Alina Fong, Shay Harith, 1 o'clock, 1:30, Richard Boehm, and that's also video, and then Polly Grasham, who was here today for twice. And at 4 o'clock, we'd like to call Terry Sanderson.
Okay.
Terry,
Okay.
tomorrow or Mark?
Tomorrow.
Mark.
Tomorrow afternoon. Oh, Mark Harath is not available till Friday. And then Friday, finish Terry Sanderson, and then call Mark, I think it's Harith or Harath anyway. And then we would call Gwyneth Paltrow.
Okay.
That's Thursday and Friday.
And I'm not gonna I guess if there's not enough time to deal with Fong tonight, because you've got, not only do you have to send them their designations, they need to create their counter designations, and then you need to create the tape from that, right?
We've already got the tape.
How about
And we struck out, Your Honor, we
You think they're
took-
fine, you think that their counter designations will be in there?
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe it'll be that simple, maybe it'll be that simple.
We haven't played games with this, no.
I'm not
No,
saying.
I'm
Let
saying
me
that.
finish. We're not trying to slip anything in the back door. You made your rule, and it's very clear. We disagree with it, by the way, but you made it. You have the black robe. And so, we want to live by that honorably. And we took out, I mean, I don't think it's half, it might be half of that position.
Okay.
But it's a ton of stuff.
So maybe-
Anything that mentioned fMRI, we took out.
And if that's the case, it'll probably be smooth for you guys, right?
This is James. So
Yep.
the problem is Bain. What do we do with the objections during Bain? Are you
Yeah, so
worried
Bain-
about this?
So BAME is another video, as they said, and I have not seen what they propose to present.
Have they given
but
it to you?
No, we have the video. We both have the full video, and maybe you guys are just assuming you're just planning to present.
There
the
were no
whole-
objections made.
There were a couple objections.
Hardly any.
What I was going to say is that I have not looked through that. My sense is that it's mostly okay, and it may well be that we just say let's just show the whole thing, but I just haven't had time to go back and look at those objections and see if we wanted to raise them with the court. I can do that tonight.
If there's an objection, Judge, we can turn it to silent and move forward, and leave, I mean, it's not going to the jury, it's not like an admitted exhibit.
Right.
And so, I hate to make ourselves crazy, we worked very hard last night, and I hired a guy, who's a film editor, and we gave him the exact places to edit. So, I mean, we really worked hard, put a lot of hours on this and a lot of money, and, you know, we don't want them making counter designations of things that weren't objected to, you know? So if it's not objected to, they should come in.
I'll have to see what happens. It sounds like it's gonna work out just fine. So if you can provide it to the other side and they can take a look at it and see if you have any objections, and if there are any counter designations that aren't included, then we'll deal with it as if we need to.
So we'll be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow, right?
So it sounds clear Ms. Paltrow is not being called to the stand tomorrow. Is that accurate?
We'll be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow, starting with Fong.
Let's talk about time here for just a minute. Because the Fong deposition hasn't been, if it's solidified and you're fine with it, then please email the clerk and say we're fine until 9. If you're not fine with it, then we need to come back maybe at 8:30 and resolve and iron out any issues that may exist.
Ms. Paltrow is not being called tomorrow to the stand. Is that true?
No.
She's not on the list, so she doesn't have to be here.
And the plan is for plaintiff to rest on Friday. Is that true?
Is that what you hope to do, Mr. Sykes?
Yeah, I hope there's no more examples like today where we get thrown a curveball at 9 o'clock in the morning and chew up an hour and a half of our time. So, assuming that doesn't happen, yeah. I mean,
Well, the Fong ruling is like 2 days old, so we're all working
yeah.
together.
So
Here's my
we
issue.
plan on being done Friday, Judge.
At the end of the day, basically?
Yeah, hopefully before that.
And the reason I ask is we have 7 witnesses planned for Monday morning.
Okay,
So, thanks.
good. And then, and they'll be stacked up and ready to testify on Monday morning.
That's our goal, yes.
All right. Anything else for today then?
Yeah, we didn't even
No,
get that list.
there is one, I mean, we don't have to talk about this now. We did file a couple of days ago a motion regarding their ski expert. Bagner. Yeah, however you pronounce it. So I haven't seen a response. I didn't figure that there would be one probably till the weekend, but,
Do you know what she's talking about?
And what is it?
We have no idea what you're talking about.
oh, you may want to look.
To
I mean,
exclude the expert?
Not completely, but
Okay,
most
some
of his,
part of
most
his
of his
testimony?
testimony,
Okay.
correct.
All right,
Clarification
So-
on that. It was filed last week.
okay. And so how much time would you like to respond to that in writing?
We don't even know what they're talking about, Your Honor.
Okay. Well,
You-
if it's,
It's-
how long is it?
It's late. Why are,
15 pages, 10 pages?
Not even 10 pages.
So if it's a normal 10-page motion, how much time would you normally think that you might need between now and next week?
so, let me just
We
state,
have a-
like,
we
why
have a
are we
copy.
doing this instead of 45 days before trial?
This was a motion for clarification regarding that expert. We have a hard copy as well, but my office filed it last week. So we
Do
can
you
give
have
them
a
a copy
copy
right
to
now.
hand to us?
Yes,
Let's
that's why
see
I
it.
wanted to raise it.
And Mr. Owens, I'm not trying to be obtuse here, but I need to see the motion and I need to see your response. Maybe you're fine with it, I don't know.
Motion, it's entitled Counterclaim Defendants, Motion for Clarification of Prior Order.
Okay.
It's 17 pages long,
Apologize.
So why don't we
and
have,
it's, we
Why don't-
don't like these motions, Your Honor, filed in the middle of trial.
I understand, but this is trial. And once you throw your anchor from the shore and you're out in the ocean, things happen.
Can we just at least learn why this wasn't filed when the motion deadline was in place?
Why don't you have that conversation privately, and then you can respond in writing if you still have a problem with it. And if you want to file a written response, why don't you do it by noon on Sunday?
Okay.
Anything else from the lawyers?
No.
Okay,
No,
so
thank you.
so again, we'll plan on being here at 9 a.m. tomorrow, unless there are issues to iron out about Fong's deposition, then we'll be here at 8:30.
Your Honor, just want to tell you, Wallace was saying we sent over that copy of
Did you send the video?
Yes, the video
Okay.
and
And
the marked up.
the marked up transcript, perfect. And if there are things that I need to rule on at 8:30 in the morning, could someone email to the clerk that deposition transcript so I can have it in front of me when we're ruling on those?
One sentence for the record, I want to apologize to James Lee when I misspoke. We disclosed Dr. Seeger's treatment dates, not her actual records.
Okay, thank you.
Apologize, James.
Your Honor, I guess there was a press issue going on at lunch. I actually spent my hour at lunch on this. The AP requested a new location for its camera, and
It's not a new location. The existing order to the AP reporter is that they could have a camera, 2 cameras, one at each location where the other cameras were.
only directed at the lectern.
Correct.
That is the important part.
It's only directed at the lectern. If it's directed anywhere else, it'll be removed.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right.
Sorry, I know there's a lot of stress in the room sometimes, but we appreciate you, Judge, and your staff here to make this all happen.
All right. Well, I appreciate your hard work too, everybody. Thank you.